Good morning. So my first day in Iraq, sometime in March of 2003, I stood on the outskirts of a city called Nasiriyah with my Marines. Now, most of us had never been to war. A few had been sent to the Balkans, but most of us, and self-included, had only an intellectual idea of what war might be like, what it might feel like in our bodies, what it might feel like in our minds. And thinking back on it now, I don't know what it was that I expected that afternoon. The Marine Corps trains for war. I mean, it relentlessly trains for war. That's what it does. And I had personally shot hundreds, thousands of artillery rounds at targets on ranges, on Camp Lejeune, all the way up to Jordan, Egypt, places like that. So I knew very well the effect on target of high explosive. So standing on the outskirts of Nasiriyah with my Marines that afternoon and hearing the rounds go out, very quickly that intellectualization was displaced. So within the silence of the echoes of those booms is when I became a writer. I mean, I remember thinking as I was standing there, because I knew the effect of the rounds very well, that with every round that I'm hearing going out now, anyone within a 75-meter circle, once that round impacts, would have just died. So within those booms, within the echoes of the booms, and in the black smoke and ash rising, is really where I think I became a writer. Years later, sitting in a classroom at New York University in the creative writing program's veterans writing workshop, I was given an opportunity to revisit that day, and I did. And what I did is I wrote the memories down, and then I rewrote them, and I rewrote them for years and years and years and years and years. I think what I was trying to do is just try to understand what had actually happened that day, but more importantly, how I had felt. And what I learned in this process of writing is in that moment when we're standing there, on the outskirts of the city and rounds are going into it, is that I went completely numb. And being numb, I believe, helped me to be pretty effective in Iraq. It helped me to focus and, probably kept me and Marines alive. But writing, what that was able to do was help me to excavate the why of why it went numb. And not just excavate it, but it helped me to come back from that place. And it took me a long time. It took me 6 years before I started writing anything. And it helped me to get back to being in a place where I could, feel again. So, I'm a poet. That's what I normally do. I'm also a playwright. And I've written this story many times. And I shared one of those poems with a good friend of mine. He's a Marine as well. He's a writer, poet, one of my mentors. And I shared that poem with him, and he gave it back to me. And he said, "This is terrible." And what he said is, it's a terrible poem because what you've done is you've written 10 years of distance into the poem. You've written yourself out of the poem, and you're being dishonest in the poem. And he challenged me to go back and rewrite it. And that was something I needed to hear. And in that moment, when I took it back from him, and I took on the challenge of rewriting, I think he made me a better writer. So I'm going to recite to you the finalish draft. I mean, there's no such thing as a final draft. But the draft that was published. And as I was writing it, I also had to think about if I did write this many years into it, and he was right. He was absolutely right. Why had I done that? And I had some fears of some things that I wasn't ready to think about fully. So anyway, the poem, the final draft-ish thing, is called "And the War Was in Its Infancy Then." So, and the war was only in its infancy then. I learned early. By the time I looked over my shoulder, the sun had already fallen. Flat desert, the tree of life? Or is that just black smoke rising? My birthday was yesterday. Yesterday I saw black smoke rising from artillery strikes against insurgents. Dust floats chest high. I breathe in. The sound of boots, quick-stepping. My rifle is slung cross-body. I tap the magazine well. Tapping the magazine well reminds me how to keep safe here. Yesterday, when we arrived here, the inhabitants became specters. I feel their boots quick-step through me. Where am I? Am I still alive? In the background, lights on in a hut. Listen, I've been working myself up to say this, so I'll just say it. In the hut, insurgents are being beaten. They're crying and they're pleading, and I don't need to understand to understand. Greg, you asked, why don't you feel, but I do. And I learned that night that to survive more than 2 nights in Iraq, to tune out the crying and carrying on. But that's no longer enough. Say a prayer for your enemy. Life came like dew, disappears like dew. And the war was only in its infancy then, learning how to kill us in the morning and in the evening, on street corners, in houses and in Humvees. And when we come home, the war is most proficient at killing us. 1 at a time, 2 at a time. My name is Maurice Decaul, United States Marine Corps veteran.